smattering there between, upper L and then some middle school, and then some other. Looks like we've got some things in the sciences, but also probably those upper L people looking at ELA, math, and social studies as well. So pretty good mix. What roles do you assign when working on groups? Oh, I have one particularly on that. That would be great to talk about. So let's get started. For agenda, we'll talk a little bit about why bother with collaboration at all. Although I won't spend too much time, I figure if you're on the webinar, you already kind of have a reason to bother with it. But give you some background on that. And then some strategies for building that culture of collaboration, because that's so important first, to have the culture that supports it. And then we'll look at 7 specific strategies that you can try right away. And we'll look at them in the context of some project-based learning units, because I think it's always nice to see them in context. So why bother? I love this quote. It came from one of our scientists up the hill, actually. I was talking to one of the folks, principal investigators at our research institute. These are folks covering groundbreaking science, right? But he said there will never be another groundbreaking scientific discovery by a single individual. And what he means by that is the science is just too complex now. You have to collaborate with one another. One of the things that the Van Andel Research Institute really prides itself on is that collaboration among scientists. You have to be able to collaborate with other people. Talk, and if you've kind of studied any of that work, but these are some interesting sort of nuggets to ponder for a little bit. Productive talk, meaning, talking among students that's actually leading toward learning, accounts for about 2 to 4% of student conversation. So it's really, really low. Also, if we look at how can students learn to communicate if they're expected to be silent, right? And kind of looking at the older models of our classrooms where the teacher is the one speaking, how can we expect them to be great communicators if they don't have the opportunity to communicate? And if you think about the third one is sort of the typical way that we ask students questions is we initiate a question, student will respond, and then we evaluate their response somehow. And that's really kind of a guess what's in my head sort of scenario, where we're sort of putting out something, we're hoping they say the thing that we're looking for. And what happens when we do that is kind of the fourth one, right? We initiate a question. One person raises, or maybe several people raise their hand, but as soon as we answer or call on that one person, what are the other 24 students? They immediately tune out. They weren't called on, so they are completely disengaged from this, what is potentially a collaborative conversation. The case for collaboration is also just an opportunity to construct meaning through dialogue. How many times can we really think something through by talking it through? And then finally, collaboration skills are applicable to all students in an unknown future. If we think about, I know I get asked this all the time, how are we preparing students for jobs that we don't even know exist yet? Well, I like to think about what are the skills that were useful 100 years ago that are still useful now. Those are the things that are likely to be, useful 100 years from now. And collaboration is certainly one of those, being able to construct meaning together and work together and communicate effectively. So, again, I don't want to spend too much time because you signed up for the webinar, but a case for collaboration in case you need to convince anybody. But I also think it's good to remind ourselves that it's a process. That kind of moving from an initiate, respond, and evaluate sort of model to truly productive talk isn't something that happens overnight. So I just like to put this out there and for you to think about. You don't have to respond and share with everybody, but personally just reflect on this sort of continuum. My day-to-day classroom, where am I? Are most of my interactions more on the left side with where we just sort of initiating a question and expecting a response and evaluating that? Or are most of my classrooms, full of productive talk? And not that there's not a place for initiate, respond, evaluate, of course, but think about where do you want to be and where are you as kind of just your own metric for defining success as you look to do this. All right, so I'm going to roll through a few of these ideas for how to build a culture of collaboration next. So, and again, like I talked about at the beginning, the culture of collaboration has to be there where children feel safe collaborating with one another in order to implement the strategies around project-based learning. So I'll give you a few quick hits that you can try with these that I have found successful or have talked to other teachers who have found successful. So the first one is so simple, but it's hallway conversations. And this is just as simple as, sometimes we're really good at checking in with our students, but something about just taking that check-in outside in the hallway really helps students feel like you're kind of relating to them as people, not just same kind of, natural conversations that you're having, but try them out in the hallway or out in the yard, just outside of the classroom walls. And it just is a way to give that student that feeling that you see them as a person. It's just a little hack there. The other one is to model mistakes. And this one is really easy on paper, but sometimes harder to do yourself. I like to use the construct, I tried, I failed, I learned, right? And I like to do that every week. I tried this on the piano, I failed 100 times, my family never wants to hear that song, but I learned that I got better the more I did it, so I just need to keep doing it better if I want to get really good at it, Model those mistakes. Let them know that failure and making mistakes and learning from them is every bit a part of your daily or weekly MO, so that they know that that's perfectly okay, not only okay, but expected for them as well. When it comes to putting students in groups, I just like to put this out there. I really think I could just say purposeful groups, but if you think about ability, you want them to be diverse enough that they're able to rely on other people for different responsibilities, so that there is different skill sets in the group. And you want them to work together over some significant amount of time. So just be purposeful in your groups. I'm not saying there's never a time for random groups or for them to self-select their groups. There's times for that, but be purposeful about what you're trying to do. And if you want them to learn to collaborate and work well together, then make sure that they're small, diverse, and have a chance to kind of grow over some time. To say, oh, nice work there, nice job on this paper, it's good, I really like how you answered that question. But let's just do as much rewarding of and noticing of productive talk. I like the way you guys are communicating. Sometimes you can even have a wall where you sort of note and tally up the amount of times you've seen productive talk, so that we can up that percentage from the 2 to 4%. If they see that it's something that is noticed and rewarded, it's something they might do some more of. Another thing for building that culture is building in think time. And this is hard for me because I talk fast and I want to have a fast-moving, fast-paced classroom. But for a lot of students, they don't feel safe just blurting out the first answer that comes into their mind. And that's something we can work with them on too in that culture of risk-taking, but build in that think time. Just, when you put out it's as simple as the think, pair, share, but sometimes we forget the think and think, pair, share. Sometimes I'll add a think, write, pair, share, and that forces me to make sure that think time happens, because you kind of build in that write time so they can sort of write out their thoughts. But for not just your introverts, but those folks who just want a little more think time before they share, make sure you're giving those folks plenty of that. The last one I'll share in terms of building a collaborative culture is to try engineering challenges. These are your quintessential kind of, team building or bonding experiences, and to realize each other's strengths. And in the end here, we'll put up a link, and there's one of them we shared from a project called What's in Your Water. It's an engineering challenge, but you can do it whether or not you're doing the project or not. It's just simply take some materials like some pipe cleaners and some cardboard, a few things, and they're trying to prevent food coloring to go from moving from one side of the water to the other. So it's a great fast-paced challenge for them, but it gets them immediately looking at what strengths one another brings and how they can communicate to kind of arrive at a goal or to solve a certain problem. So there's tons of engineering challenges out there that are super low cost, don't take a lot of time. Collaboration is challenging, but it's also fun and rewarding. So there are a few strategies to try to build a culture of collaboration. But the biggest one, I would say, if you really want some meaty collaboration, is to try project-based learning. It is the biggest strategy I can offer up to really make sure collaboration happens, because true project-based learning involves some sort of sustained inquiry. It involves collaborative problem solving. It involves a public product that the kids care about because it's going to be shown to an authentic audience. So they have a vested interest in collaborating and making sure this project reflects the best of their learning. So I encourage you to try project-based learning as a strategy for building that culture. And like I said, I'll show you some examples in a minute. But first, for these culture ideas, let's think about how do you establish a culture, a collaboration culture in your classroom. If you can share some ideas that you do in the chat box, that would be helpful for one another. I love that, applying for roles within their collaborative groups, and we'll talk about that in an actual project here in a minute and how that works. So I also like that strategy. So, and if you think of something, we'll have this up for a while. I like to emphasize the design thinking mindset. I love it. Okay, so we'll take a look at that link there that Ginger shared. That's probably some of these sort of engineering type challenges. Design and iterative thinking is a great way to get students collaborating. So thank you for sharing that. And if you think of something later, feel free to pop it in there. Those things will be available in the recording as well to be able to check out. All right, so now we'll look at those 7 strategies I talked about. So these are the ones that we're going to go through, and I'll show each one of them in the context. The classic jigsaw, but I always have to bring it up because it's one of the best. Cooperative learning norms, applying for roles, which we saw someone mention that. Collaborative charts. These titles are kind of cryptic, so I'll share with you exactly what they mean. So the first one, like I said, we'll put these in context. So this was in a project-based learning unit called Food for Thought, and in this project, students, they learn about nutrition, essentially, and they sort their different foods around what they think is healthy and not healthy. They learn about GMOs, they learn how to read nutrition labels, they look at a lot of different sources to know what is nutritious, what is not. And then they decide we got to do something about our country and our community. And so let's write a recipe book where we put all this nutritious information that we learn into a recipe book with healthy and delicious recipes. And then they hold a Top Chef competition, and then they end up putting on a family and friends feast where they share their recipes, and they also can publish that recipe book and sell it at the fair, so at the feast, so that they can give the proceeds to something like Action for Healthy Kids. So that's a little bit about the project. In this case, to get them collaborating, this first strategy I think is just so much fun. It also does a lot with creative thinking skills as well, but it's learn by interview. So in this case, we have them writing a letter from one recipe to another, or from one ingredient to another. So the kids have to collaborate and say, what would this ingredient feel about this ingredient? Or what would this recipe feel about this other recipe? I think this works particularly well after they did the Top Chef competition, and they could see, oh, this one got a lot of stars for taste, but this one got a lot of stars for nutrition. What would they say to one another if you could personify them? So it's just a fun way to build some creative thinking, but also it gets kids talking, and because it's so abstract, it kind of loosens some of the fear, actually. You can't say anything too wonky. You're talking about, fruit talking to vegetables. So learn by interview is a fun one to try. And you could do this with elements of the periodic table talking to one another. In younger grades, you could do it with nouns talking to verbs, as you're learning parts of speech. So you can take anything that's inanimate and have it personified, and you have to think critically about what are the characteristics of that thing that you could turn into emotions or actions that a human would do. So it's a great way to get kids talking to one another and coming up with these interview questions or letters. I told you I was going to talk about the jigsaw. So I mentioned in this project, they learn a lot about nutrition. In this project, we provide, looks like all these green little links here are links to nutrition sites. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if we were to have all of our kids research 6 different as a way to split your class into groups. Each of them takes one of these resources, understands it deeply, they become an expert in that, and they bring that back to their other groups, to their larger group as the expert. So it gives them that confidence, it gives them a specific role to take on and share what they've learned, but it also is a time saver, so I like it for that reason as well. But Jigsaw is a great way to collaborate. I'm also going to give a bonus one here, collaborate across classrooms. So most of what we'll focus on, because as teachers, we can control what's in our class, but I know a lot of teachers now want to collaborate across classrooms. So if you found another teacher who wanted to do food for thought, we have these books. They could share them with another class who was doing recipes. It was fun. They could see that, oh, this one was really close, but they just changed this one ingredient. I wonder what that would do to my recipe. So a lot of fun ways for them to collaborate across classrooms. All right, the next project I'll share is called Moments to Remember. And in this project, students partner up with some senior citizens. So we had a group of senior citizens that was willing to come to the classroom. We partnered them up with a pair of students, and they interviewed them. They learned about their life. Before that, they learned a little bit from maybe a historian around, what are the significant events of the last 50 years. So they had history that impacted these folks' lives. so they could ask really in the biography of their senior, and then they made a beautiful memoir of that biography, and then they presented it to the senior citizens. And what was great about that, they could give them their beautiful book, but they also helped them develop profiles online on Facebook so they could share that book with some of their loved ones. So that's a little bit of the project. How did they collaborate? Well, this was a great one to work on setting up cooperative learning norms. So before we went out to the senior center, one time they went out to the senior center, and the next time they came to the classroom. But we had to work out norms. What is that going to be like? What if they can't hear very well? Like, there was lots of things to think about. So whether that's within your classroom or whether it's going out to some sort of field trip like this, developing those norms together so that students just feel like logical sense. What in order for us to be successful in talking to our senior friends, what are we going to need to think about? What are the rules we need to abide by? So that's cooperative learning norms, coming up with those together so they feel vested in them. And as one of folks mentioned before, this was a great one to apply for roles. I'll show you a little video of this project in a second, and you'll see there's lots of things that needed to be done. You needed an interviewer, you needed someone to take notes while they're talking to their senior friend. You needed someone to write a rough draft, and maybe someone to write the final draft, maybe someone to be the editor, someone to be the illustrator. And there's lots of different roles. And I think this was a nice way to give students ownership, but also clarity around what is it I'm expected to do. And I think it's also a nice real-world kind of experience when, let's say, two people, maybe it's a project where you're creating a play, and more than one person wants to be the director, and you as a teacher have them apply for that role, and you pick the person who made the best case, and not everybody gets to be the director. And I think that's important for students to learn as well, and to learn how to deal with. So that's apply for roles. I'll show you a quick video that's about 2.5 minutes, but I think it's worth, you can see some of those, that collaboration actually happening, which I think is so valuable. So I'll play that video for you.
Oh, sure.
We had
A quarter a week,
be careful how we spent.
25 cents.
What is your favorite dessert now?
The movie was 10 cents
There's a
back
lot of good ones out there. So you can go to like after 2 weeks, 5 minutes.
then. Well, I could, but I always went on Saturday afternoon.
Saturday afternoon.
What is your favorite? What's that?
It was 4 hours long.
It was a long one. What is your favorite dessert? Did you watch it all in one setting?
Yeah, they had an
What is your favorite
That was so long ago.
dessert?
I think it probably started out about
What's
50
your favorite
cents.
dessert? That sounds really good.
Strawberry shortcake.
But then 50 cents.
All right, so that's just a little picture of how that particular project went down as the seniors and their students met one another and began their interview process. And then, like I mentioned, they went back and showed their memoirs. The other neat thing about this isn't necessarily collaboration, but what I like is that we challenge the students in this to not just write sort of a chronological biography, here's what happened first, next, in this person's life, but to actually do a theme biography. What's the theme of this person's life? Was it love of family or overcoming obstacles? So it was just a really beautiful project. Anyway, another cross-classroom collaboration ours to share with another class who met a whole different group of seniors. And what if they did it with a group in a different part of the country? So you actually got to see what was life like in a different state over the last 50 years or so. All right, I'm going to speed up because I know we're running out of time. The last two, Prevent the Spread, is a project in which you are swabbing your schools for bacteria and analyzing the growth, and then testing different substances. Do the best say public service announcement to promote the hand sanitizer or the germ slayer that did the best job. And they pitched to the principal if the hand sanitizer they had in their school wasn't the best one. They got to pitch that. So collaborative brain sketch is a great way to get students brainstorming. So this is just where, in this case, when they were kind of thinking about what are the things we're going to swab, our computer, the door handle to our classroom door, that sort of thing. So they would just put on a sticky note different things, draw what they think they might want to swab, and then pass it to the next person. That person would label it. And it's just a way to get the benefit of multiple brains on this collaborative brain sketch. Another nice one, in this case, once they did their PSAs, their public service announcements, they hung them up, and I would actually do this as sort of a nice finished version, but I would do this a little bit before their finished version. It's called sticky note feedback. You post the PSAs around the room, and then you have students write they would kind of do a gallery walk and look at their classmates' work, and they would write feedback, but write it on the back side of the sticky, so you could post it up there, and as people are walking around, they don't see any of the feedback. Only the person who will gather that poster later sees that feedback. So it's a nice way to have some private feedback to a student. You know, let's have another classroom swab some of the same stuff and see if they got the same results, because science should be replicable if it's accurate and their data is done well. So the last one I want to share with you is not actually in a project itself, and but to the project overview, so you can get lesson by lesson instructions on those. But an anchor white chart is just a way to think about collaboration or some other non-cognitive skill, and have students work together to describe what it looks like, sounds like, feels like. So here's one. You can use this as like vocabulary, so adaptability. As a class, talk about what that sounds like, looks like, feels like. It doesn't have to be a white chart. Here's an example. Teamwork. What does it look like, feel like, sound like? You could do it in a list like that as well. So another way to get students collaborating. All right, we've got a few minutes here, so I'm curious which one of these collaboration strategies you might try, and if you have any other ones that you would like to share in the chat box. So it looks like the sticky note feedback is a winner so far. That's something folks are going to try. But lots of things people are willing to try. So thank you for trying those. Hopefully they are ways to get your students working together a little bit more. And looks like there's some other ideas in the chat box, so don't miss those as well. So I mentioned some resources. I wanted to just let you know what you got here. I talked about that team building engineering challenge, so that's available. It's from What's in Your Water, that one to kind of see if you can prevent the food coloring from spreading in the water. And then a lot of the strategies I just talked about are in this cooperative learning strategies handout. There's a couple more in there as well. And then if you're interested in those projects at all, there's the project overviews. They'll give you kind of an idea, lesson by lesson, of how you could conduct these projects that I just described. So that's kind of the collaboration strategies we had. As I talked about, project-based learning is one of the best ways to implement that. So the projects I shared with you today are all available at blueappleteacher.org. If you are interested in more than just the overview, but actually all of those resources, like I mentioned, for food for thought, you know, all of the real-world experts, so nutritionists who are willing to Skype into your classroom, and all of those sort of assessments and rubrics and stuff that comes in a kit to do as well. Those are available there at blueappleteacher.org, and we're getting tremendous feedback from our teachers using them, so we hope you'll try those. And other than that, be sure and follow us and like us and stay up to date. If you have any questions or wonderings, please reach out. You can email me. There's my email. And we will, I think, be giving a question and answer kind of feedback as well with our as an email after this as well. So feel free to shoot any questions my way.